Hey everyone, welcome back to More English with Dry. Today I'm going to take you through the English Language Paper 1 Question 3 on structure by having a little look at the Netflix phenomenon Squid Game. I'm going to take you through some of the basics, as said by AQA, on how to do this question, and then we're going to look specifically at the first episode of the TV show. So the first thing that I'm going to do is talk to you a bit about the advice that AQA themselves give on this question. It is one of the hardest ones in all of the English literature or language GCSEs, and it's one that students across the country perform least well in consistently every year. Now the reason for that is that it's particularly difficult. It asks you to think of the entire source that you are given. Now remember, in paper 1 it is a fiction extract, and you were usually given something from towards the beginning of a novel or a short story, but it does vary. The question asks you how the writer has structured the text to interest you as a reader, and then asks you to focus on the writer's focuses at the beginning of the source, how and why the writer changes this focus as it develops, and any other structural features that interest you. Now that seems difficult because you are trained so heavily to analyse language that sometimes analysing structure is difficult. You do need to use quotations, but you don't analyse language devices, so talking about similes or onomatopoeia is not going to help you. What you kind of need to think of doing is writing a summary, except talking at all points about how it makes you feel as a reader. Now, that means that you have to describe why certain events are ordered in certain ways, and why the writer chooses to put certain bits or certain interesting parts before other parts. Now, the next part is taken directly from the AQA website. You are being assessed on how well you can analyse the writer's use of structure to achieve effects and influence readers, using relevant subject terminology to support your views. Now, just to be clear at the start, relevant subject terminology does not mean you need to understand extremely complicated structural devices. Of course, that will help, but by relevant subject terminology, they mean words like beginning, focus, change, that kind of thing. It does not need to be more specific or more detailed than that necessarily to get the mark. So if you cannot find some sort of complicated structural device, do not worry. It doesn't mean that you are not going to get a good mark. As per the mark scheme, structural features could be simply at a whole text level, and that includes references to the beginnings, endings, or perspective shifts. Perspective is a brilliant one to talk about because it's very easy. Perspective means the person or persons that the writer is making you see the story from behalf of. So for example, first person narration is from the point of view of one specific character who is using the I voice to talk in. If this changes, that is something you can talk about, of course. At a paragraph level, this could include topic changes or aspects of cohesion. Now that means how the writer makes the story flow, how the writer makes the story not flow. For instance, using changes in perspective, for instance, using changes in time, changes in dialogue, changes in setting, changes in character. And then at a sentence level, when it contributes to the structure as a whole. Now that means you can talk about things like short sentences versus long sentences. And that is always a good way to sound very basic if you don't do it well, but that is something that you can practice and get better at over time. Now, AQA have given these as key questions of the text for you to consider as you are completing the answer. When I first start to read the text, what is the writer focusing my attention on, and then how is this being developed? So what are you being thought to look at the beginning? If you think about a TV show or a film, it's almost like what is the opening shot showing you? What feature of structure is evident at this point? Now this, as we've said, could be characterization, it could be setting, it could be sounds, it could be sights, it could be dialogues. Why might the writer have deliberately chosen to begin the text with this focus and therefore make use of this particular feature of structure? So what is the point of starting it either being deliberately vague or deliberately scary or deliberately happy? What effect is it having on you as the reader? What main points of focus does the writer develop in sequence after the starting point? Now this is where I talk about having a summary that continues, i.e. an idea of you talking about everything that you can see as it goes on. You're not just summing it up like you would in a Wikipedia article, but you are summing up constantly what the writer is doing and how it's having an effect on you. And then how is each being developed? Why is the writer taking me through this particular sequence? How is this specific to helping me relate to the intended meaning at these points? What does the writer focus my attention on at the end of the text? So how is the ending different to the beginning? How is it different to the middle? How is it different to the bit just before the ending? How is this developed as a structural feature? And then how am I left thinking or feeling at the end? Why might the writer have sought to bring me to this point of interest or understanding? So as I say, these are all good questions to consider when you are starting to think about how to answer question 3. However, the reason I'm making this video is because I like to think about doing it through any aspect of media that you can. I think great practice is by looking at TV. I think great practice, honestly, is looking at the way writers make TV shows, make films, and therefore how they take you through shots in that way. And that's why I'm going to look at this example of Squid Game, because it is, of course, something that everyone is watching at the moment, but there is a particular scene in the first episode which I think is a masterful way of looking at structure. It completely shifts your perception as a viewer, and I think it kind of crystallises a lot of points we're looking at here. So without further ado, here we go. The scene begins with a wide-angle shot showing a bright blue sky and a warm sunny day. The viewer is forced to consider the scene as a whole and begins to question why all the people are wearing the same outfit. However, in general, the scene appears to be positive and welcoming. Imagine this would be you talking about the start of the extract. Your general focus, i.e. here, we're not focusing on anything because it's such a wide shot. We can see so much, and that means so much is unclear, but so much is interesting to us. The focus then does narrow slightly onto one of the buildings and the doors, which seem to slam shut. The viewer feels the same level of confusion as the people in the foreground, which elevates the tension, as it implies to some extent that they're trapped, and this creates a slight sense of foreboding. Notice here how in my answer I'm giving an example of how it's making me feel as a viewer. At this point, the camera angle shifts to a position behind the people, and in the distance a tree and 3 figures, one far taller than the others, is vaguely visible. In this way, the audience is given the same point of view as the characters, and as such we share their confusion at what is happening. This is an example of talking about perspective. Here we are not being forced to identify with any specific character, but them as a whole. And what that does always is it makes us empathise with them and take on their feelings, in this case uncertainty. A voice begins speaking over a tannoy system. The way in which it commands creates an impression of omniscient, almost godlike power, which suggests that someone's in control of whatever is happening, and this adds to a sense of the overall unease. Notice as well about how the players are starting to space out. From this we can tell perhaps that none of them are united or together, and it creates a slight sense of competition, or, again, further uncertainty. However, the camera focuses on the face of a single older member of the crowd. This is the first person we're forced to look at in close detail, and he is smiling. He looks extremely happy and optimistic, looking up into the sky, almost into the sun, and this is a contrast with the faces of the others. So despite the overall confusion, this close-up diffuses a great deal of the tension felt by the viewer. We can't help but feel positively, just like this man is. We now zoom into the doll and the larger figure, which is a gigantic robot. It again lulls the viewer into a false sense that the scene is going to unfold in a childish or almost amusing way. Despite the ominous warnings, it seems like the contestants are going to play a child's game. Specifically, it talks about green light, red light, which some of the characters puzzle about being a game from their youths. Here, the tannoy says that if movement is detected, you will be eliminated. Now this word stands out as a juxtaposition with the childish nature of the game and the doll. It seems like an oddly harsh word, and so feels kind of incongruous with the context of a game that they would have all played. Again, this adds to the sense that it seems generally positive, but ultimately there is an element of mystery and slight unease. The game begins and we are forced to focus on 2 specific characters. Now they are identified as being different due to their hairstyles, which are complete polar opposites of each other. And this means that we are forced to focus entirely on them, and it creates an element of further uncertainty as we wonder which of them will win their bet that they've made to get there first. However, when they are told to stop, and the yellow-haired person is still moving, the scene is brought to a complete standstill as we hear a huge crack of sound echoing out. Now, because of the large space and the relative quiet, it is an echoing, reverberating sound, which means that it stays with the reader for longer. This shocks the viewer and makes time almost stand still, as we don't quite know what's happened to him. The other character slowly approaches, and we tensely wait to see what has happened. The first real turning point in this scene is when he spits out blood, because we realise he's actually been hurt. At this point, the rising tension, the creeping sense of suspicion that there is something sinister going on, is a climax, and it causes us outright panic. The true murderous nature of this game has been revealed, and this sparks fear in the viewer and the other contestants. Indeed, the perspective now rapidly changes to that of the doll, and the viewer sees contestant through what looks like a scope of some sort of gun or weapon, and this adds to the sense of danger. The scope zooms in once more, this time on the second contestant, and it slowly dawns on us that the word eliminated was meant very literally. This realisation means that the character, still moving, is in mortal danger, and as he runs away, the panic is heightened. The viewer realises that the loud noise was a gunshot at this point, as the fleeing second character is similarly eliminated. His blood then splatters onto the face of a woman, who the camera zooms closely in on. Her shock morphs into total terror and panic, and this represents a second turning point, because from now on chaos has been unleashed, and it signals the moment that the other contestants all realise their lives are in danger, and they turn to flee. The slow build-up to the scene gives way to complete disorder. All the contestants are desperately trying to escape, and this is the scene's ultimate climax. The camera starts to rove around, showing various shots of all of them moving as fast as they can. This is a very frenetic camera movement, and it reflects the total chaos. We as a viewer cannot focus on one thing easily as a result, which further helps to convey this mayhem. The previously non-threatening and almost idyllic blue serene background reveals itself to be a murderous compound of death and suffering, as the transformation of this setting when guns appear from the baby blue walls. The contrast summarises the overall scene as one which seemed innocent but was hiding mortal danger. The contestants desperately try to escape, however they're unable to get through the locked doors. The viewer realises that our earlier suspicion that they were trapped were correct. The sight of the players climbing over each other and the bloody handprints on the walls of huts is harrowing to the viewer. All that can be heard are screams of fear and pain, which creates a fitting soundscape for this scene of chaos. As the noise dies down and the last few contestants are either standing perfectly still and therefore not breaking the rules or shot down, we can see an almost circular structure, because the scene returns to the point where the tannoy is reading out the rules, reminding the characters of what they need to do. However, the repetition clearly has a polar opposite tone to previously, because instead of seeming childish, the game seems evil and deranged. The repetition of the word eliminated stands out in particular, as the viewer realises again that the ominous use of the word previously was actually meant literally. The camera focusing on the individual faces of the dead contestants reinforces the sense of confusion and misery. The camera pans out in a similar way to the beginning of the scene. However, at this point the viewer can see only seemingly endless dead bodies rather than the spread out contestants. As such, the scene comes full circle in a way, again with a backdrop of perfect silence, except in this case it makes the viewer question who else will die. Now this is the overall summary of the scene with my examples of how you analyse the structure of what the writer, or rather the director, has done. I hope you found this video helpful. Use it as guidance for how you might start to begin to tackle the question 3. Unfortunately, it will never actually be an episode of a TV show, but you can use a lot of these techniques in your approach to actual written answers. Hope you found this video helpful. Take care, and I'll see you again.